Standard Theory for Dentures. I am Sotokawa, a dentist practicing in Morioka City, Japan. This topic covers the clasp and indirect retainer placement. Contents: 1. Principles. 2. Kennedy Class 1. Bilateral free ends. 3. Kennedy Class 1, Type 1. Bilateral free ends plus central defect. 4. Kennedy Class 2. Unilateral free end. 5. Kennedy Class 2, Type 1. Unilateral free end plus molar central defect. 6. Kennedy Class 2, Type 1. Unilateral free end plus anterior tooth defect. 7. Kennedy Class 3. Molar interdental defect. 8. Kennedy Class 3, Type 1. Interdental defect plus interdental defect. 9. Kennedy Class 4. Minor anterior tooth defect. 10. Kennedy Class 4. Major anterior tooth defect. 1. Principle. According to Zarb's prosthodontic treatment for partially edentulous patients, clasps and indirect retention devices for partial dentures are positioned based on the following 3 principles. Zarb Partial Denture Design Principles. 1. Place clasps on teeth adjacent to the edentulous area. 2. Retention clasps should typically be placed at 2 locations. 3. Indirect retention devices should be positioned as far as possible from the fulcrum line. For each Kennedy classification, we will explain the placement of partial denture clasps and indirect retention devices based on this principle. 2. Kennedy Class 1 Bilateral free ends. As shown in the figure on the right, the retention clasps are placed on the teeth adjacent to the bilateral free end edentulous areas. The dotted line represents the interclasp line connecting the occlusal rests of the clasps. The red arrow indicates the distance between the interclasp line and the indirect retention device. The indirect retention device is placed where this distance is maximized. Typically, the indirect retention device is often placed on the proximal marginal ridge of tooth number 4. 3. Kennedy Class 1, Type 1. Bilateral free ends plus midline defect. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on teeth adjacent to bilateral free end edentulous areas. For teeth adjacent to anterior edentulous areas, a rest and guiding plane are placed, and no labial retention arm is placed. By placing a guiding plane on the tooth adjacent to the anterior edentulous area, the denture achieves sufficient retention. On the other hand, when occlusal pressure is applied to the artificial molar teeth, the denture rotates around the interclasp axis. In this case, the rest placed on the anterior tooth moves away from the anterior tooth. Consequently, the anterior tooth does not experience upward extraction forces, enabling its long-term preservation. 4. Kennedy Class 2. Unilateral free end. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on teeth adjacent to the edentulous area and on teeth as far away from the edentulous area as possible. Indirect retention devices are placed on teeth as far away from the interproximal line as possible. Typically, indirect retention devices are placed on the mesial marginal ridge of the first premolar. 5. Kennedy Class 2, Division 1. Unilateral free end plus molar canine gap. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on the teeth adjacent to the free end edentulous space and on the teeth adjacent to the mesial side of the central edentulous space. A clasp without a labial retention arm is placed on the tooth adjacent to the buccal side of the central edentulous space. The reasons are as follows. When occlusal pressure is applied to the artificial teeth and the free end base sinks, the denture rotates around the interhook axis. If a retention arm is placed on the clasp of the tooth adjacent to the mesial side of the central gap red arrow, that remaining tooth will be repeatedly pulled upward and suffer damage. Therefore, by removing the retention arm red arrow, the design allows the clasp to lift away from the hook tooth when the denture rotates. As a result, the remaining tooth can be preserved long-term without suffering damage. 6. Kennedy Class II Division 1. Unilateral free end plus anterior interdental gap. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on the teeth adjacent to the free end edentulous area and on the most posterior tooth on the opposite side. Rest and guiding planes or ledges are placed on the teeth adjacent to the anterior edentulous area. No buccal arms are placed on teeth adjacent to a mid-anterior edentulous area. Consequently, when occlusal pressure is applied to the free end base, the denture rotates around the interclasp axis, causing the base over the mid-anterior edentulous area to lift away from the adjacent teeth. As a result, the remaining teeth are not subjected to extraction forces, enabling their long-term preservation. 7. Kennedy Class III. Molar interdental defect. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on the tooth adjacent distally to the edentulous area and on the most posterior tooth on the opposite side. A rest and guiding plane or ledge is placed on the tooth adjacent mesially to the edentulous area. No labial arm is placed on the anterior tooth adjacent mesially to the edentulous area. 8. Kennedy Class III, Division 1. Molar diastema plus diastema. As shown in the figure on the right, the retention clasp is placed on the tooth with the longest interhook line among the four teeth adjacent to the edentulous area. However, for aesthetic reasons, the labial arm on anterior teeth is avoided whenever possible. In the case of the right-hand example, placing retention clasps on upper left tooth 3 and upper right tooth 7 would provide greater stability for the denture. However, in this case, aesthetics take priority, so the design omits the labial arm on tooth 3. A rest and guiding plane or ledge is placed on upper right tooth 7 and upper left tooth 3, which flank the fulcrum line. 9. Kennedy Class IV. Minor anterior tooth defect. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on the most posterior teeth on both sides. Rest and guiding planes or ledges are placed on the teeth adjacent to the edentulous area. All occlusal pressure applied to the artificial teeth is borne by the remaining teeth. By placing guiding planes on the teeth adjacent to the baseplate, the partial denture achieves sufficient retention. 10. Kennedy Class IV. Multiple anterior tooth loss. As shown in the figure on the right, retention clasps are placed on the teeth adjacent to the edentulous area and on the most posterior teeth on both sides. When the base attempts to detach from the alveolar ridge, the partial denture rotates around the interclasp line. At this point, the rest of the most posterior tooth's clasp prevents this rotation, and the retention arm of the clasp adjacent to the base performs its retention function. When a portion of the occlusal pressure applied to this partial denture is to be borne by the alveolar ridge, a method is chosen where the retention arm of the last tooth clasp is not placed in an undercut. Consequently, when occlusal pressure is applied to the denture, the last tooth clasp disengages from the hook tooth, and the occlusal pressure is applied to the teeth adjacent to the base and the alveolar ridge. Standard theory for dentures. Clasp and indirect retainer placement is now complete. If you enjoyed this topic, please click the like button. If you have any questions or concerns, please write them in the public comment section below.